My name is Dr. Michael McCoy. I'm a professor in the Politics and International Relations Department. It is my pleasure to welcome again Canon Andrew White here to Wheaton. Just wanted to say briefly among some of the many things from his biography, Canon White studied at St. Thomas's Hospital in London, qualifying as an operating department practitioner in 1985. Following St. Thomas's, he trained for ordination at Ridley Hall, Cambridge University, and also studied at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem. So for many of our students here, yes, you can switch your careers after your major. You are not locked in after you've majored in one thing. In 1998, he was installed as the Director of International Ministry for the Diocese and Cathedral of Coventry. Soon after, he began to head Coventry's International Ministry of Reconciliation and became the Archbishop of Canterbury's special envoy to the Middle East. During this time, he became actively involved in the Middle East, helping to lead the negotiations during the siege of the Church of the Nativity in 2002. He also helped...
They're too young to remember that.
It was important. If you want to know more about it, please ask him. In a class earlier today, I did. He also helped draft the first Alexandria Declaration of the Religious Leaders of the Holy Land and the Baghdad Religious Accord, both of which were instrumental in bringing together key religious leaders of Christian, Jewish, and Muslim faiths. Canon White has been awarded over 15 international peace prizes, which includes this year's International First Freedom Prize, which has previously been awarded to heads of state and prime ministers. And I could just give a personal testimony from today that he is also very generous. Earlier today, he was not wearing this bow tie. He handed out one of his bow ties to one of our students in class who was admiring it.
I had to go and buy a new one.
I wasn't sure if you were going to come in just without a tie, but
no, I could never do that.
So, I'm not saying he'll do it, but I'm just saying for someone, who's feeling good today. Canon White has been quoted as saying, "I have been detained at gunpoint, been thrown into a room with people's chopped off fingers and toes all over the floor, and I've had my picture posted on walls around Baghdad with the notice saying, 'Wanted, dead or alive.' Members of my church have been kidnapped or killed. I have lost many friends. It is very difficult, but we never give up." Thank you, Canon White, for being with us today.
Do you like my new bow tie?
I do like it. I'm going to confess, I thought that the one earlier was nice. It was a very generous gift.
It was a lot nice. It was English.
Where was it from? You said it was like British Royal or?
Royal Artillery.
Royal Artillery. So if any of you see Izzy Smith and he's sporting a really nice tie, now we will call him Iskar Smith because it's a pretty nice tie. And so, Canon White, I think when we often hear about the Middle East, we hear about many of the terrible images described in this quote you gave. And so I'd actually like to start off with asking that in the past year, what encouraging signs have you seen about potential reconciliation, first in pertaining to Iraq and Syria, and then next pertaining to Israel-Palestine?
None. None, really.
That was not the answer I expected.
Pardon?
I said that was not the answer I expected, though I'm not surprised by it, sadly.
Yeah. We've seen such terrible things happening, but we have not given up. And the thing which is really encouraging is the work that we have been able to do with the children of the refugees, the refugee children. They had nothing, they had no school. So we started them one. Why? Because a little boy called Mario said, Abuna, Abuna, can you give us a school? So I said yes.
And how many students have been educated through that school?
Well, we have 300 students now.
Are these based in multiple refugee camps?
No, all in one. All the students are from multiple slum homes in Makkah in Jordan. But the school is great.
So the sign of refugee children receiving this education, that's the most encouraging thing you can tell us right now, the situation?
Yes, because there are no schools provided. There is no schooling whatsoever. And I asked Marwan, his daddy had been killed. He was so distressed. He just cried and cried. I said, Marwan, if I could give you anything, what would you want? He said, Daddy, I want to school. I want to go to school. I said, you will. And we did. It cost us literally hundreds of thousands of dollars to get school opened up, to get teachers, to get buses every day, to take them. It's doing wonderful. And I'm in class 5. I am. I was in class 1, but I rapidly got put up to class 5.
Congratulations.
Yeah.
To the best of your ability, to the extent that you feel comfortable sharing, can you describe what it was like when it first became apparent that ISIS was going to pose a true threat to the both Christian and Muslim communities in Iraq, and your eyewitness account of how the Iraqi government responded?
Well, at first, we didn't know it was going to pose a threat to the Muslim community. It has very much. But we knew that it was a threat to the Christians and the Yazidis. And we knew it was a threat because we knew our people were being killed.
And when did the really most violent targeting begin?
I can't say exactly. It was about 10 months ago. Really awful.
I would say from the American perspective, it seemed to come out of nowhere. It seemed that following U.S. withdrawal, which I want to talk about, we talked some about earlier today, I want to talk more about, but it seemed that following U.S. withdrawal, things weren't perfect, but Iraq was sort of, I don't know, stumbling towards a type of stability, and it seemed like ISIS almost came out of nowhere, as out of a nightmare. Was that the similar perspective within Iraq, or were there rumblings that you saw, or it just seemed to come out of nowhere?
Well, we knew that things were going bad under the al-Maliki regime. He was an extreme Shia leader. And from the point of view of the Shia, now it must be said that most of our friends are Shia, and they're not all negative by any means. But they basically had joined together with Iran, and they totally sidelined the Sunni. And so when the Sunni suddenly came back in opposition to what had happened to them, we weren't surprised. We knew it would happen. And it did, in a far more traumatic way than we could ever have imagined.
Now, you mentioned to me earlier today that you were an active part of the Sons of Iraq program. So just for you all who may not be familiar, Sons of Iraq program was a program that was established by the U.S. in 2007, 2008 as part of the U.S. surge into Iraq, that along with the United States sending in additional troops into Iraq, upwards between 20 to 40,000. They also did a program of trying to rehabilitate Sunni Iraqis into Iraqi society, into Iraqi government as a form of reconciliation. So can you tell me what your role was with that program?
Well, this was very much a brilliant initiative of General David Petraeus, and I was involved in getting the various Sunni religious leaders to bring on key tribal leaders to actually work with the US government and the coalition rather than against them. And do you know the reason why they did it? Because we paid them. If you give them money, they'll do anything. And immediately that money stopped, ISIS developed.
What do you see as, and I want to note that I'm going to ask Canon White maybe 2 or 3 more questions, and then we're going to open this up to the audience. So please be thinking of questions, and we'll proceed from there. So I'm asking a few more questions, but I encourage you all to be thinking of questions as well. First, what effect did the U.S. withdrawal happening? Do you see that as something that needed to happen because there are some arguments that the U.S. withdrawal needed to happen for the Iraqis to shape their own future, versus others who would say that destabilized the situation. What was your own view at the time as withdrawal was beginning to happen?
Well, we knew that when withdrawal happened, Iraq would seriously go downhill. Iraq was not at the stage where it could run itself. Iraq has never been at that stage. Even today, it is not at that stage. And so when withdrawal took place, that was what really laid the foundation for the terrorist extremists to take control. And the groups like ISIS were established.
Now, but could the U.S. have really sustained a long-term role? Because my understanding was that by the time the U.S. withdrew, there were many, even within the Shia government, that wanted the United States to leave. Could the U.S. have really maintained that position for the long term?
Well, yes, a lot did want them to leave because they wanted to think that they were in control and could do everything. And they clearly could not. And they still cannot. And yes, the US military invested a lot of time in trying to train the Iraqi military, but they never learnt very quickly. Really, they never learnt anything at all. Great idea, we're investing in training these people. But they couldn't really understand.
Now, I understand you were in a position to offer some advice to the U.S. government. What advice did you offer then, and what advice would you offer now?
Well, I worked very closely with the US government, especially before the invasion of 2003. And I worked very closely with every ambassador and military leader until quite recently. What is very difficult, what advice would you give now? When the fact is that now we are in a terrible situation because they withdrew. We were just beginning to make progress with them there. Iraq nowadays is 100 times worse than under the Saddam days. It was bad then. I admittedly supported the invasion of Iraq in 2003. Now, when I look back, I say I was totally and utterly wrong. Iraq is so much worse nowadays than it was in those days.
Can you specify more? What do you think you were wrong about? What did you think in 2003 that you now look back on and say, I was wrong?
I thought we clearly had an evil dictatorial regime and we needed to remove it. And we all hoped that some form of democracy could be established. There's no form of democracy. Democracy in the Middle East does not work. What works is benevolent dictatorship. In Jordan, the most stable country in the Middle East, it's not democratic. There is a king who has total power, and he's nice. That is benevolent dictatorship. And he took over from King Hussein, his father, who had total dictatorial control. But he was nice. And that's what works. What the Middle East needs are strong leaders, not quite woolly liberals who can't do anything. No, lead them in America.
Do you see hope for a benevolent dictator in Iraq?
Well, al-Abadi, the present Prime Minister, is trying to be benevolent, but he is not a sufficient dictator. People don't follow him. And that is the problem there, that he isn't the one that people automatically follow. To be a leader in the Middle East, you need people to follow you. You can't make that happen. They either will or they won't. Now, you know, under Saddam, we had one Saddam. Maybe his two sons, Uday and Qasem, were bad dictators as well. But now we have thousands of Saddams. Everybody who has any influence and any power tries to be a dictatorial leader.
Are you similarly pessimistic about the chance for reconciliation between Israelis and Palestinians?
Well, at the moment, there is no reconciliation. And nothing is really happening. We have something called a coalition. And the coalition is between Israeli religious leaders and political leaders and Palestinian religious leaders, not very significant political leaders, because since Yasser Arafat, we haven't really had one. Maybe Sabari Akat, maybe Marwan Barghouti, but we are in need of a big leader.
And so that's what you see as then the major solvent to many of these problems, strong leaders who can impose a sort of almost a benevolent order.
Yeah.
And that you see that as lacking among the Palestinians.
Yeah.
Do you see the potential of the Israelis being able to impose a benevolent order that would be suitable for both Israelis and Palestinians? That would be amenable for both Israelis and Palestinians?
No, I don't think. Can I get rid of this chair?
Oh,
It is the most uncomfortable chair I've ever had.
Well, we brought that chair for you if you wanted that one. That one over there.
Can I have an ordinary chair? Oh. That's the kind of chair that you should have for students who are being really bad. Oh, this is wonderful.
Lesson. Don't try to be fancy, just be simple.
Yeah. As regards the Israelis trying to impose things, the Israelis is very interesting. Went recently and voted for Netanyahu. So many of them voted for him. Not everybody, but quite a majority. I have a wonderful Christian Assyrian assistant in Palestine, Hannah. And I said to Hannah on the election day, Hannah, have you been to vote? Just making sure he had. And he said, of course I've been to vote. So I then went on to the next question. He's a Christian Arab. Who did you vote for, Hannah? He said there was only one person you could vote for. Who was that? Netanyahu. And it was very interesting to see these Arab Christians saying he was the only strong leader they had to vote for and the one they trusted.
So even Arab Christians in Israel voted for Netanyahu rather than the Arab bloc.
Absolutely.
Wow.
Very interesting.
It is very interesting.
Yeah.
So given the lessons that you saw in Iraq, did you have this level of skepticism when you saw the Libya operation about to overthrow Gaddafi?
I did really, yes. I knew it wouldn't work because there was no strong leader. And the thing is that people like Gaddafi, they might be bad, they might be weak, but at least people followed them.
And so, do you think the atrocities that leaders like that are likely to commit is just going to be better than the alternative?
Often, yes.
Because one thing, again, in the class you spoke in today, my course Peace and Diplomacy, one of the things I emphasize to students is a lot of times with politics, you just have a list of bad options. Yeah. And so you have to choose, you have to make the tough call, but what the least bad option is.
Exactly.
So I guess with that, we'd say that is Sisi the least bad option in Egypt?
I think he may be. Yes, when you look at what the other options are, they're quite serious. I think they've just got to run with what they've got.
And so my last question I'll ask before I open it up to questions. Dr. Crow, are we going to have a cue here, or just people raise their hands, or just raise them? Okay. So with that, I'll just start seeing hands, and hopefully I'll see yours. Please be patient. For those students in the school that you helped establish in the refugee camp in Jordan,
Yes.
What are they looking for from, particularly since I'm a politics professor, what are they looking for from the U.S. government to do?
Nothing. They don't think about the U.S. government.
If they did, would they want the U.S. to do anything?
If I was to say, what about the U.S. government, they'd say, what's that? They literally have no idea about it whatsoever. We know that the US government really runs the world. Fortunately, it's not the UN. that would be really worrying. Really worrying. But the Arabs that I work and live with never think about the US government.
And so they're looking at the situation with ISIS, with Iran, and they want the US to have no part of it.
No, they don't even think that far. They don't think about the US. I have never met one of our Iraqi refugees who has ever mentioned the US to me. Never. That is a reality. The thing is, there they are in Jordan now, and nobody cares about them whatsoever. Not the US, not the Jordanians, not the Iraqis. The only people who care a small amount are the Canadians. I'm serious. The Canadian government is the only government which show any interest. Just this morning, I had Prime Minister Harper's office saying to me, "We really want to see you next week because we know you are helping the Iraqi Christians and we want to help you." I said, "Why are you so concerned suddenly?" Do you know what they said? Because the Canadian Jews came to us and they said, "It happened to us. We don't want it to see it happening to others. And we care about them." And the Canadian Jews said, "Even if the government can't put the money up, we will."
Well, one thing I often encourage my students to do is to try, when thinking about international politics, to not have a US-centric mindset. This is a good endorsement of that. With that, open for questions. Sarah? And if you're going to ask, could you stand up?
So I was going to ask this before you brought it up, but then you brought up the UN. So I was just wondering if you could speak to what you think the best actions the UN or African Union might take to help refugees or help with the situation at all.
Well, the UN...
I just want to repeat the question so it gets recorded. So she asked a question about what could the UN possibly do to help refugees and help those in Jordan?
Union.
An African Union.
The UN just say they've run out of money. They can't do anything. So what could they do? They could work on the process of helping people get overseas refugee status. Do you know the people who have helped with getting our people refugee status? The only people are the Americans and the Canadians and the Australians. The worst are the British. We haven't given status to one person. You have got 600,000 of our people. So there are lots of great things about America. Even when things might not be good, generally, politically, you have done an incredible job. And we love you.
strong leader, or the one-time strong leader, Assad, who still presides in a way there, is he a friend or foe of the Christians? They once looked to him as a minority Alawite, as somebody who would be sympathetic to the Christian minority. Do you think that's any longer the case? Should we want Assad out of there, or should we try to prop him up?
So the question is the Assad regime a friend or a foe to Christians? And given that, should that be a leader that the U.S. and other countries are looking to support?
The reality is, he's a friend. Without him, we're quite worried about what will happen. I used to work with him, so I used to know him well. He was an eye surgeon, and I anaesthetized his patients. And he wasn't very good at doing eye surgery either. Leave him there. Otherwise, he might go back to being an eye surgeon.
And that's truly the greater danger. Anyone else?
I was speaking to a Palestinian friend over the weekend who's told me kind of an interesting thing. He said, education is the only weapon I have to continue to fight. So kind of framing your efforts to educate Iraqi refugees with that statement, what are the most important things you're trying to teach your students to equip them to have some sort of a future?
It's very interesting that I have also established a school in Bethlehem, when in Beit Jala, next door. We have 650 students. It is an outstanding school. It's recognized as the number one school in Palestine now. And we are trying to do the same with our children in Jordan. And it's very interesting because these children have never known what it's like to be at a Christian school before. And now they have Christian education. And they love school. They love learning. And they are so good, especially class 5.
How do you staff your schools?
So she asked, how do you staff these schools?
Our schools are staffed totally by Iraqi Christians who are teachers. A few of the staff are Jordanian, but they're predominantly Iraqi Christians. And you can't be employed at all if you're an Iraqi refugee. So we don't pay them, but what we do is what we do for many of their families. We provide them with their housing, their rent, their food, and their living expenses.
And we meaning, where is your income coming from?
So further question, what is the source of income?
My income, well, I have something called the Foundation for Relief and Reconciliation in the Middle East, FRRME. And our money comes from individual Christians and individual churches. And they are so many key supporters. Just normal people, not governments, not mega NGOs, just people who love us and care. And they do.
leadership was what was needed. Could you kind of elaborate on the type of leadership that you would look to in the Middle East, and is there anybody there that could be propped up as a potential leader?
So the question was about what, and tell me if I'm getting this wrong, what type of leadership should people in the Middle East be looking towards in terms of providing stability or support?
Maybe just to clarify, is it strictly military leadership, or what sort of leadership would you say would be most effective?
I know exactly the person I would want as the leader of the nation. He is a member of parliament. His name is Yonadam Canon, and he is a Christian. And we trust him 100%. But the problem is that the coalition which makes up the leadership of Iraq trusts him, but would never appoint him as leader. But we have got some very good Christian leadership. But amongst some of the Islamic parties, there's so much infighting. So it's difficult.
When you say that they trust him, in what regards they trust him? What are the areas of trust they have about him?
Well, when they come to pull the coalition together, he is appointed as the one who will oversee the formation. Whenever there is anything that major needs to be decided, he is the person they will go to because they trust him. And he's not one of them.
Does not being one of them makes him more trustworthy because he's outside?
Yeah. We love him, don't we, Fuller?
I'm interested in some of the ways that you manage the stress that you live under. And when the professor introduced you as someone who'd been on posters, dead or alive, they want you, and seeing people who had lost their fingers, and obviously you've seen a lot of trauma. And so how are you doing?
So she asked Canon White, how is he coping with going through, witnessing, experiencing so many of the traumatic events he's gone through, and just very simply, how are you doing?
I'm fine. I'm great. Do you know why?
Really?
Because of the cross. And my hope is built on nothing less than Jesus' blood and righteousness. It really is important. However terrible things may be, I said to the children at school the other day, it was nearly Easter, and I gave them all one of these crosses. And the next day I was in class 5, and the teacher said, "Where have you all put your cross?" And the children said, "It's in our heart. It's in our heart." And that's what keeps us going. Would you like a cross? It's from Bethlehem. It's made by my friend who's called Joseph, and he's a carpenter in Bethlehem.
And he still hasn't given up his necktie, so you never know. So she asked about, should the U.S. become involved in, I assume you mean, in combating ISIS in Iraq and or Syria? Is there anything else? And to what degree? Thank you. Here's something else.
Well, the fact is that we are only going to overcome ISIS terror if we've got people on the ground. And it's not just America, we need a whole coalition. Dropping bombs from the sky is not the answer. But the really terrible thing is, if we have people on the ground, our people will get killed. You can't do it without pain, brokenness, and loss.
So one question I'll ask is, what role do you see Iran playing in any type of coalition?
In any coalition which the Iraqis are trying to bring together, it's quite funny that the Iraqis or Iranians? Iraqis.
Well, see, what would Iran's role be in a coalition to combat ISIS?
Well, Iran is very much against ISIS because it's seen as Sunni extremist. And already we are seeing that Iran is showing considerable power. If Baghdad was attacked, if Karbala was attacked, or Najaf was attacked, the three main Shia areas, they would be protected by the Iranians. It's a reality.
Do you see Iran's role as a positive one in Iraq, or is it one that's troubling to you personally?
Well, to be quite honest, it is made to seem as negative all the time, but without it, Iraq would be in a really serious situation now. Can't live with them, can't live without them. It's a reality.
So you've talked about how the U.S. and coalition forces in Iraq have actually made things a lot worse, hundreds of times worse, or 100 times worse. How would you, as a pastor,
By leaving.
By leaving, okay.
Yeah.
Well, how would you, as a pastor, give hope to American or coalition forces who feel like their time there and their sacrifice is actually useless or make things worse?
This is so awful. It is so difficult because I used to like to be able to say to my American coalition friends, we could only do this because you were with us. But now I can't say we did anything positive. For all those lives which were lost of our young people in the forces, whatever country they belong to, Polish, British, Americans, you can no longer say that you saved a nation. That's what's really painful.
Does the gospel speak into that? Does the gospel, can it give them hope?
The only hope is what I say to our people who have lost their life or lost lives of loved ones. that now they're dancing in heaven. The hope is a heavenly hope. Yes, we messed up, but Jesus didn't mess up. The hope is real, is sure, and it's a hope for even those who try to rescue a destroyed nation.
And so for the record, that question was, I'm sure you all heard it, but just for our recording record, that was a question about what do you say to those who are part of the coalition that overthrew Saddam Hussein? Was that a wasted effort? And in what ways can the gospel offer hope to those who might have to hear that it was?
Can you say a little bit more about why democracy doesn't work in the Middle East? And in your opinion, is democracy incompatible with this?
So the question is, can you expound on why democracy couldn't work in the Middle East? In particular, do you believe that democracy may be incompatible with Islam?
It doesn't work in the Middle East because the Middle East believes in dictatorial leadership. The whole concept of democracy is against everything that Middle Eastern politics stands for. And therefore, also against Islam in practice. You can say in practice, yes, Islam should be democratic. Show me where it is. Show me.
So are you pessimistic about Tunisia?
About Tunisia.
We just had
Very pessimistic.
So you're very pessimistic.
Yeah. Yeah. Are you?
Not. I'm pessimistic about. I'm concerned about Tunisia not because of what's happening inside Tunisia, but because of what's happening around Tunisia, which is that I think that there are militants and there are parties who don't want to see democracy in Tunisia succeed because they want to believe that authoritarianism can be the only one that can win and want to say their type of authoritarianism is the only one that can win and want to disrupt that. But what we've seen in Tunisia is that even Islamic parties have, when they lost an election, they handed over power. And I guess what I would say to the general argument is, and here I'm saying something that George W. Bush, the Bush administration, said in the lead up to the Iraq War.
He was a good man, wasn't he? You won't have to answer that. Don't answer that.
That people said that democracy couldn't work in the Catholic world until it did. People said democracy wouldn't work in Asia until it did. They said it wouldn't work in Japan until it did. And so I'll confess, I don't.
You hope it does, but it doesn't at the moment. I understand. What
I don't think because it hasn't succeeded means it can't succeed. That's what I would say. I don't think because
absolutely. I agree with you. I agree with you.
Okay, good. I feel validated.
What about Turkey?
You stand up.
Yeah. What about Turkey, which is 99% Muslim, and is a functioning democratic nation?
He brought up the point of Turkey, which I also should have said. Thank you. You stumped it.
I have no trust in Turkey.
Okay, not.
I am deeply disturbed by Turkey. The fact that Turkey cannot acknowledge the Armenian genocide is horrendous. How can you say that a country is a democracy when it has killed hundreds and hundreds of thousands of Armenians and Assyrians, and it denies it.
You said the same thing about America and Native Americans, though.
America and
Native Americans?
you can say the same.
And how can we call ourselves a democracy? It's the same parallel.
Sorry?
It's
So-
the same parallel.
So he's saying, and also say it for the record, he's saying that given that the United States, well, I wouldn't say the United States doesn't acknowledge that it's responsible for killing millions of Native Americans, just
It does a lot to try
just as
and
emphasize.
support the Native Americans. More money is given to the Native Americans than to the other Americans. So much support. It's probably out of guilt, but at least they're doing it. Look at what Turkey is doing. Nothing for those it has infiltrated evil against. At least, you know, I'm a Brit. I'm not American. But at least America has tried. It might not be perfect. It might have a lot more to do. Well, you've got an election coming up soon. Maybe you can see what you can do. Not saying anything.
I would say, though, that I think there's a difference between acknowledging atrocities and acknowledging a bad past and whether you can have a functioning democracy. I mean, coming to his point, or what I'm going to assume is your point, still, we see Turkey as a society that has stable elections. When parties lose elections, they give up power, except when the military doesn't like it and then the military does coups. So, admittedly, Turkey is a little shaky. But I think we could all hope that Iraq would have Turkey's type of governance. We could hope that Libya would have Turkey's type governance. And I think that's still more than an absolute dictator who you hope that absolute dictator on that given day feels good about protecting the rights of any religious minority or majority.
Turkey does not, to this day, protect its religious minorities. Every day I have Iraqi Christians who've fled to Turkey saying how awful it is for them. Isn't that right, Fuller? Terrible. Absolutely horrendous. Our people who have ended up in Turkey are hurting. But the thing which really saddens me is the Armenian and Assyrian situation. We can never forget that.
And I'll say my stepmother is actually Armenian. Her grandparents, either grandparents or great-grandparents, came here because of the genocide.
Yeah. So she's an Ian.
Okay.
Her last name originally would have been something Ian.
Oh, possibly.
Not possibly, definitely.
Oh, there you go. Once again, this is a deferring moment.
Any Ians here? Ah! So you're an Armenian. So you know about the suffering. So I said the right things, did I?
I'm curious if you've been in contact with your church in Baghdad, and how are they doing, through everything that's been going on?
So he asked, how is his church, and has he been in contact with his church in Baghdad, and how have they been doing through all these different crises?
Well, Baghdad, fortunately, is not suffering the terror of the rest of Iraq. So Baghdad is the one place which is okay. So the Baghdadis are good. So many of the people who have fled back to the church are those who had fled back to their homeland of Nineveh and Mosul and Kirkuk, and now running back to Baghdad, because the place which was once the most dangerous is now the safest.
You spoke earlier today in class about one of the necessary components for peace being people needing to be willing to make compromises and sacrifices.
Yes.
So given that, are there situations in which peace is impossible as long as one party is at the table? Maybe they're unwilling to make compromises, and then if so, does that mean you need to maybe forcefully remove them, or I'm sort of thinking of this.
Very good question. He's saying, how can you make peace when one side is not willing to make compromises? I said in one of the classes earlier, in order to move forward, we have to be willing to take compromises, to make compromises. How can you make peace when there is one party who is not willing to compromise? Very difficult. And I think in a way Turkey is such an example, because Turkey as a society has so much which in theory should enable it to make peace and move forward, but it won't even acknowledge the truth of its past. So how can it really move forward in peace? I would say it can't. Very interesting talking about Turkey again. Turkey wanted to become a member of the European Union. No way that will ever happen unless they acknowledge what they did to the Armenians and the Assyrians. It's not just making compromises, it's acknowledging the facts of your history. Next one, please.
Canon, could you address how you feel the gospel brings differing religious factions together? I know you've been very involved in trying to broker peace in the Middle East for a long time. One of my observations of transplanted Iraqis that I know in North America is that a lot of them who are raised Muslim tend to be nominal or moderate or whatnot, not very religious. Most of them have left for a long time, and they stay away from faith or religious discussions because their view of that is that they've seen it be polarized, and it creates, hate between Sunni, between Shia. Although Iraq for a long time lived in peace with Jews and Muslims and Christians for many, many years until Saddam and the Ba'athist Party and other sorts of things. So I guess my question was more of a spiritual one in terms of how you see the gospel working in bringing peace among different religious factions.
I think the gospel is the only way real peace can come, because there were two words from the cross: Father, forgive. Father, forgive. Father, forgive. That is what creates peace. Without that, there isn't real forgiveness. There isn't real peace. And there isn't real sacrificial change. With it, there is. And Iraq did live as Jews, Christians, Muslims together. But in 1958, it massacred its Jews. And many of the Jews fled to Israel. After Saturday comes Sunday. And Sunday is what is happening now.
So I'll ask a question that I wanted to ask earlier. In the class that you were in, you said that 95% of Israel is secular.
Yeah.
In a way, almost the flip side of the question just asked. How do you feel that strongly secular nature and that what I've observed is an act of hostility to people of faith, how do you think that affects Israeli politics, Israeli willingness to compromise? Do you think there's a connection between being very secular and how you view issues of reconciliation and politics in general?
I think the fact is that reconciliation is hard without a faith tradition. And yet you see people like Bibi Netanyahu, when elected president, going to the kotel, to the wall, and praying against the wall. That gives me hope, because Netanyahu is not religious at all, but deep down inside of he and so many Jews, there is the belief in Hashem. You know, in Israel, God is only referred to as Hashem, which means the name. Christians always try and say the name of God as if it's the right thing to do. It is a terrible thing to do. You must never mention the name of the one who was, who is, and who is to come. In Judaism, that can only happen when the temple is rebuilt. So God is simply the name, Hashem. And Jesus is the name which is above every name. Jesus, name above all names, wonderful Savior, marvelous Lord, Emmanuel, God is with us.
Precious Redeemer, living Word.
Good job they don't sing like this in chapel.
I can't sing, so I was only joining in when there was a good quorum. So you alluded before that even Arab Christians voted for Netanyahu.
Yes.
What is the situation for Christians in Israel? Because you never hear about any level of active persecution, but I have read that it is a place that it's it's uncomfortable to be a Christian. Have you found it to be the case? And in general, what's the status for Christians in Israel?
The Christians in Israel will be very clear that they are in the only place in the Middle East where they have freedom to be a Christian. I'm not talking about the Palestinian Authority. I'm not talking about the Christians in Ramallah, Beit Jala, Bethlehem. I'm talking about the Christian community in places like Ibilin and Nazareth and in the northern Galilee. Christians are protected.
So not necessarily in terms of protected in terms of whether they're facing persecution, but do they feel that they are particularly those who are Jewish Christians, that this is, or ethnically Jewish, this is a protected place, not protected in terms of physically, but a place where they feel accepted and part of the community?
If you'd asked me that 10 years ago about Jewish believers, I would have said no. If you ask me that now, I say it's totally changed. There are so many active communities of Jewish believers. Don't call them Christians, because they're not Christians. They're Jews who believe that Yeshua is HaMashiach, that Jesus is the Messiah. And now they have got so much more freedom and dignity and belief and presence than ever before.
And what has happened in the past 10 years?
They were really frowned upon. To make Aliyah for Jewish believers to go back to Israel and say, look, we are real Jews, was so difficult. Now we have so many new congregations which have come to the fore. There are now scores of congregations of Jewish believers.
And to be potentially being, once again, U.S.-centric, I wonder, is the strong relationship between evangelicals in the U.S. and Israel, has that been helpful for Jewish believers in Israel?
Well, Jewish believers often say that it hasn't been helpful for them because the Christian Zionist lobby is divided. There are those who don't think Jews need to be converted, and there are those who do. So it's very diverse. So you've got the John Hagers on one side and the David Stearns on the other side. It's hard. It's not easy. But the government of Israel is so grateful for the support of the Christians now. There's something called Christian Allies Caucus, which I'm part of. And they are so grateful, this is a government group, that they have got Christian support for Israel.
You were in my class a few days ago, today, and you mentioned about how, especially with the persecution that the Iraqi church, Christian church is facing, about how there's very little awareness of that in the global church or the Western church, and how that's not the case with a lot of other big religions. So I guess I would say, like, what was one instance, or any, while you were in Baghdad, of that you actually felt the support of the global church, and how does that manifest itself for you?
Can you say that again, please?
Yeah, so, and in general...
Who is supportive?
Sorry?
I think if I understood the question, he's asked, can you give an instance where while you were in Baghdad, you felt the support from the global church? Either, and I'll just add on to this, either spiritually or materially.
Well, so often the Christians who I am involved with would say, you are not alone. We have not forgotten you. We are with you. And there are so many who are. And that's the reason we can do what we do. 'Cause they're with us.
And so actually building on that question, I asked before about what those in refugee camps are asking about U.S. government, and you said they're not thinking about the U.S. government.
No.
Are those in the refugee camps, are they thinking about the global church? Do they feel the prayers and the love from the global church?
If you tell them about it, they do. But they were thinking they had been forgotten. But when we take them their food, their relief, when we open their school for their children, we make clear to them that we can only do this because your family, your brothers and sisters in the Christian church around the world are with you. And it's incredible what we have been able to do because of you, because of our brothers and sisters. It's quite funny that there are people who truly know who is with us. I said to my daughter Fuller the other day, I said, I've got a new person working with me called Peter. And what did you say?
Is he a Wheaton man?
She asked, is he a Wheaton man?
Of course he's a Wheaton man. But you, as an Iraqi Christian now living here in Chicago, you know how important it is to have the support of the churches, don't you? And the support of Wheaton. I'm not just saying that in passing because I'm sitting in Wheaton, but it's so important to us.
And I got the privilege of meeting today a student we'll be having coming next year because Canon White told her when she was 7 years old that she should come to Wheaton.
You mentioned before increasing numbers of Jewish believers. We hear sometimes stories, Jews who believe that Jesus is the Messiah. We sometimes hear stories of Muslims who believe that Jesus died for their sins. And I wonder if you have any context or texture or familiarity with that as a phenomenon.
So when you said that, we sometimes hear that Muslims say Jesus died for their sins and that Jesus was an important prophet in the Islamic faith. Canon White, can you offer greater insight into that?
Well, I said earlier in one of the classes, the wonderful thing about the Islamic people who have come to believe that Jesus was with them is they have all seen Jesus. It's not me preaching. They have all had visions of Jesus. One of the big ISIS commanders who led the persecution of many Christians and the destruction of Christian towns like Kush there he was, blown up by one of his own IEDs. And he was in the hospital. He's still in hospital. He says, the other night when I was trying to sleep, Jesus came to me. And he told me, what you did was totally wrong. But I will forgive you if you follow me. And now he says, I am following Jesus. And nothing will stop me because he came to me. Rather good that, isn't it?
You know, I personally, when I graduated college, I was spent 2 years in.
But you weren't at Wheaton.
I was not at Wheaton. I actually became a Christian in college. I did not enter college as a Christian. I became a Christian through Campus Crusade when I was for all intents and purposes, I was a junior. And then through Campus Crusade, even though I probably shouldn't say that on video, I was in China for 2 years as a student missionary. And you hear a lot from the Chinese church about what they went through, particularly during the era of Chairman Mao.
Yeah.
And one thing that they would say is that, they said the persecution of Chairman Mao was a blessing. He said because Chairman Mao wiped the slate clean. And he did a lot to break down many of the Buddhist beliefs. And actually, by his heavy persecution and ultimately the moral bankruptness of the Communist Party, millions in China turned to Christ.
Yeah.
Do you see a potential for a similar crisis happening in Iraq and in Syria, where in the midst of all this bloodshed, in the midst of all this chaos, there is really room for more visions of Christ and a spread of the gospel?
Yes. So many of our people, so many of the Iraqi people have come saying, the only place we have been shown love is at the church. And even though we cannot say we're becoming Christians, we're following Jesus. And soon, and very soon, they'll be in the kingdom.
Well, we are a little early, but I would say that that is a powerful word to end on. That even in the midst of so many conflicts, we are seeing a growth of the church. And I pray when it won't be something that is undercover, it won't be something that people have to talk about privately, but that when we see revived churches in Nineveh, in Kirkuk, and all the way to Najaf and Baghdad. So can you please join me in thanking Canon White today?
How are you sitting on that chair?
I'm tough like that.
You okay?
I'm fine.
Oh, good.
I grew up hard, so I can handle this chair.
I grew up soft.